The dust storm had swallowed the horizon, leaving Sarah Jenkins standing alone at the stagecoach stop in Little Creek, Wyoming Territory, 1879, with nothing but a torn wedding dress and a pair of once white satin shoes now reduced to tattered remnants clinging desperately to her blistered feet. The stagecoach driver had unceremoniously dropped her trunk beside her before speeding off, leaving a cloud of dust in his wake. Her hands trembled as she clutched her single piece of luggage, containing all her worldly possessions. Little Creek wasn't much of a town, a single dirt road lined with wooden buildings, their paint peeling under the relentless western sun. Sarah's cheeks burned with humiliation. She'd traveled all the way from Boston to marry a man she'd never met, a man who had promised her a life of comfort and security. Howard Prescott had written such beautiful letters, describing his prosperous ranch and promising her a life far removed from the cramped quarters she'd shared with 5 other seamstresses. But Howard wasn't here to meet her. No one was. A gust of wind whipped her hair across her face as she tried to steady herself. Her feet throbbed with each small movement, the torn shoes providing no protection against the rough ground. The sound of approaching hoofbeats made her look up, hope momentarily flaring in her chest. The rider approached slowly, his hat pulled low against the afternoon sun. He was tall in the saddle, broad-shouldered, with a quiet confidence that spoke of years navigating this unforgiving land. As he drew closer, Sarah could make out sun-weathered skin, a strong jawline, and eyes the color of a summer storm. "Madam," he said, tipping his hat as he dismounted. His voice was deep, with the slightest hint of a southern drawl. "You look like you might be waiting for someone." Sarah swallowed hard, pride warring with desperation. "I was supposed to meet my fiancé, Mr. Howard Prescott. Do you know him?" The man's expression darkened. "Howard Prescott," he paused, seemingly choosing his words carefully. "Madam, I'm afraid Howard Prescott passed away 3 months ago. Typhoid fever took him and half his ranch hands." Sarah felt the blood drain from her face. The world tilted dangerously, and for a moment she thought she might faint. 3 months. The letters had stopped coming 2 months ago, but she'd already been on her way, her ticket purchased, her meager savings spent. "I see," she managed, though she saw nothing clearly through the tears threatening to spill. I suppose I'll need to find passage back east." Even as she said it, she knew it was impossible. She had no money, no prospects. The stranger's gaze traveled down to her feet, taking in the ruined shoes and the trembling that had overtaken her entire body. "Name's Elijah Atwood," he said, removing his hat completely now. "I run the Double Circle Ranch about 10 miles north of here. I knew Howard, not well but enough to be sorry for your troubles." Sarah nodded, unable to form words around the lump in her throat. "Those shoes won't take you another step," he said, gesturing toward her feet. "How about we get you situated at the hotel, and I'll see what Mrs. Peterson at the general store can do about proper footwear." Sarah's instinct was to refuse. She'd been raised to be independent, to never accept charity, especially from a stranger. But the reality of her situation was undeniable. She was alone, penniless, in a town where she knew no one, with no way to return home. "Thank you, Mr. Atwood," she said quietly. "I would be most grateful." Elijah picked up her trunk with ease. "My horse can carry this. Think you can manage to walk to the hotel? It's just down the street." He pointed to a 2-story wooden building with a wide porch. Sarah took a tentative step and winced as a sharp pain shot through her foot. "I believe I can make it," she said, straightening her spine with determination. They made their way slowly down the dusty main street. Sarah was acutely aware of curious eyes watching from storefronts and windows. A mail-order bride with no groom was bound to be the subject of gossip for weeks to come. The hotel was modest but clean. The proprietress, Mrs. Holbrook, a plump woman with kind eyes and graying hair, took one look at Sarah and clucked sympathetically. "You poor dear," she said. "Let's get you settled. A hot bath will do wonders." Elijah set down the trunk. Mrs. Holbrook, Miss Jenkins here has had some unfortunate news. Her intended, Howard Prescott, has passed on. Mrs. Holbrook's hand flew to her mouth. Oh, my dear girl, how dreadful. I'll see to getting her some proper shoes, Elijah continued. Perhaps you could arrange for that bath and a hot meal. Of course, Mr. Atwood. Elijah turned to Sarah. Miss Jenkins, I'll return shortly. You're in good hands with Mrs. Holbrook. Sarah nodded, overwhelmed by his kindness. Thank you, Mr. Atwood. I don't know how I'll repay you. A small smile tugged at the corner of his mouth. No need for that. Just frontier hospitality. An hour later, Sarah had bathed and changed into a simple blue dress, one of the few practical garments she'd packed alongside the wedding dress she'd sewn herself with such hope. Her feet, freed from the tortuous shoes, were soaking in a basin of warm water mixed with Epsom salts that Mrs. Holbrook had provided. There was a knock at the door, and Mrs. Holbrook entered, followed by Elijah, who was carrying a package wrapped in brown paper. Miss Jenkins, he said, setting the package on the bed. Mrs. Peterson didn't have much selection, but I think these will serve you better than what you had. Sarah unwrapped the package to find a pair of sturdy leather boots. They weren't fashionable by Boston standards, but they were practical and, most importantly, intact. Mr. Atwood, this is too generous, she protested. Nonsense, he replied. Can't have you walking around in torn shoes. His gaze was warm, and something in it made Sarah's heart flutter unexpectedly. Why don't you try them on, dear? Mrs. Holbrook suggested. Sarah carefully dried her feet and slipped them into the boots. They were a touch large, but with thick socks they would fit perfectly. Stand up, let's see, Mrs. Holbrook encouraged. Sarah rose, testing her weight on the new boots. The difference was immediate. The sturdy leather supported her feet, and the pain that had been her constant companion receded. They're perfect, she said, genuine gratitude in her voice. Thank you, Mr. Atwood. Elijah stepped forward, his movements deliberate. To Sarah's surprise, he reached for her hand, bowed slightly, and pressed his lips to her knuckles in a gesture that belonged more to an Eastern drawing room than a frontier hotel. My pleasure, Miss Jenkins, he said softly, his eyes meeting hers. The touch of his lips on her skin sent a shiver up her arm, and for a moment the room seemed to fade away. It was only when Mrs. Holbrook cleared her throat that Sarah remembered they weren't alone. Well, Elijah said, straightening up and replacing his hat, I should be heading back to the ranch. Miss Jenkins, I'll call on you tomorrow if that's agreeable. Perhaps we can discuss your plans. Sarah nodded, suddenly tongue-tied. After Elijah left, Mrs. Holbrook gave Sarah a knowing look. Elijah Atwood is the finest man in these parts, she said. Never seen him take such an immediate interest in anyone before. Sarah felt her cheeks warm. He's simply being kind to a stranger in need. Mrs. Holbrook smiled. Perhaps. But kindness can grow into something more, given time and nurturing. She headed for the door. Dinner will be ready in an hour. You rest those feet until then. Left alone, Sarah sat on the edge of the bed, her mind whirling. In less than a day, her carefully laid plans had crumbled, leaving her adrift in a place far from home. Yet amidst the uncertainty, a tiny spark of possibility had ignited, a spark kindled by a pair of storm-gray eyes and the gentle press of lips against her hand. The following morning, Sarah awoke to sunlight streaming through the thin curtains of her hotel room. For a disorienting moment, she forgot where she was, expecting to hear the familiar sounds of Boston carriages on cobblestone streets, vendors calling out their wares. Instead, she heard the distant lowing of cattle and the occasional whinny of horses from the livery stable down the street. Reality crashed back. Howard was dead. She was stranded in Little Creek with no prospects and dwindling resources. A knock at the door interrupted her thoughts. Mrs. Holbrook entered with a tray of breakfast eggs, bacon, and biscuits still steaming from the oven. "Good morning, dear," she said cheerfully. "Thought you might like to eat in your room this morning. The dining room is full of ranch hands and they're a curious lot." "Thank you," Sarah said, grateful for the woman's thoughtfulness. Mrs. Holbrook, I need to find work. Do you know of any positions available in town? The older woman sat on the edge of the bed. Well, let me think. The school teacher position is filled, and the only other respectable work for a single woman would be at the general store or perhaps helping Doc Wilson with his patients. Sarah nodded, mentally assessing her skills. She was a capable seamstress, could read and write well, and had basic nursing knowledge from caring for her ailing mother years ago. Mr. Atwood mentioned he'd be by this morning, Mrs. Holbrook added. He might have some ideas. As if summoned by his name, another knock sounded at the door. Mrs. Holbrook opened it to reveal Elijah, hat in hand, looking freshly shaved and wearing a clean shirt under his leather vest. "Morning, ladies," he said, nodding to them both. "Miss Jenkins, I hope you're feeling better today." "Much better, thank you, Mr. Atwood," Sarah replied, suddenly conscious of her simple appearance. She'd already dressed in a practical green day dress, her hair pulled back in a no-nonsense bun. "I'll leave you two to talk," Mrs. Holbrook said, excusing herself with a smile that suggested she was already planning wedding arrangements in her head. Once alone, Elijah took the chair by the window while Sarah remained perched on the edge of the bed, her hands folded in her lap. "I've been thinking about your situation," Elijah began. "Little Creek doesn't offer many opportunities for a lady like yourself." Sarah's heart sank. She'd feared as much. "However," he continued, "my ranch is in need of someone to manage the household. My mother ran things until she passed 2 years ago, and since then it's been just me and the ranch hands. The place could use a woman's touch." Sarah stared at him, unsure how to respond. Was he offering her employment or something else entirely? Reading her confusion, Elijah hastened to clarify. "It would be a proper position, Miss Jenkins. You'd have your own quarters in the main house, meals provided, and a monthly wage. Your duties would include keeping the house in order, managing supplies, cooking for me and occasionally the hands, and whatever else might arise in the running of a household." "That's very generous, Mr. Atwood," Sarah said carefully, "but I don't know the first thing about running a ranch household. I've been a seamstress in Boston my entire adult life." Elijah smiled, his eyes crinkling at the corners. "I suspect you're a quick study, Miss Jenkins. And it's not so different from any other household, just more dust and fewer neighbors." Sarah considered the offer. It was more than she could have hoped for under the circumstances. Honest work, a roof over her head, and time to figure out her next steps. "When would you need me to start?" she asked. "Whenever you're ready. Today, tomorrow, next week." Sarah took a deep breath. "Today would be fine. I see no reason to impose on Mrs. Holbrook's hospitality any longer than necessary." Elijah looked pleased. "I'll settle your bill here and be back with the wagon in an hour." "That give you enough time to pack?" Sarah nodded, already mentally preparing for yet another change in her life. True to his word, Elijah returned with a wagon an hour later. Sarah's trunk was loaded, goodbyes were said to Mrs. Holbrook, and they set off toward the Double Circle Ranch. The journey took most of the morning. As they traveled, Elijah pointed out landmarks and told stories of the land's history. Sarah found herself captivated not just by the tales, but by the man telling them. There was something genuine about Elijah Atwood that set him apart from the few men she'd known in Boston. "So what made you agree to marry a man you'd never met?" Elijah asked as they crossed a shallow stream, the horses splashing through the clear water. Sarah considered the question. "Practicality, mostly. I was one of 6 seamstresses sharing quarters above a dress shop. The hours were long, the pay meager, and the prospects dim. Howard's letters painted a picture of a different life, one with open spaces, fresh air, and the possibility of a family someday. And now—" Elijah's voice was soft. Sarah looked out at the vast landscape, the rolling hills giving way to distant mountains. "Now I'm not sure, but I'm here and I'm determined to make the best of it." Elijah nodded approvingly. "That's the spirit that built the West, Miss Jenkins. Determination in the face of uncertainty." By midday, they crested a hill and the double circle spread out before them. It was larger than Sarah had imagined, a sprawling main house built of sturdy logs, several outbuildings, corrals filled with horses, and cattle grazing on the surrounding grasslands. In the distance, she could see ranch hands working, tiny figures on horseback moving among the herds. "It's beautiful," she breathed. "It's home," Elijah said simply, pride evident in his voice. As they approached the main house, a dog came bounding out to greet them, a large, shaggy creature with a friendly demeanor. Behind it came a young man, perhaps 16 or 17. "That's Tommy," Elijah explained. "His father was one of my best hands. When he died last year, Tommy stayed on. He helps around the house and with the lighter ranch work." Tommy took the horses as Elijah helped Sarah down from the wagon. Her new boots touched the ground with confidence, a far cry from her arrival in Little Creek the day before. The inside of the house surprised Sarah. It was spacious and well built, with solid furniture and large windows that let in ample light. But it was also clearly a bachelor's home, functional rather than comfortable, with a layer of dust on most surfaces and a general air of neglect. "As I said, it could use a woman's touch," Elijah commented, noting her assessment. Sarah nodded, already mentally rearranging furniture and planning cleaning strategies. "It has good bones. We'll have it feeling like a proper home in no time." The next few days passed in a blur of activity. Sarah threw herself into her new role with enthusiasm, cleaning, organizing, and gradually transforming the house. Elijah gave her free rein, only stipulating that his father's old study remain untouched. She discovered that despite his rough exterior, Elijah was an educated man. Bookshelves lined the walls of the main living area, filled with volumes on everything from animal husbandry to Shakespeare. In the evenings, after dinner, he would often read aloud while Sarah mended clothes or worked on her latest project, curtains for the bare windows. A week into her stay, Sarah was preparing dinner when she heard a commotion outside. Looking through the window, she saw several riders approaching, a cattle drive returning early by the looks of it. Elijah came in, his expression grim. "There's trouble brewing," he said, washing his hands at the pump by the sink. "Cattle rustlers hit the Johnson place last night, took half their herd and shot 2 hands. Sarah's hand flew to her mouth. "How dreadful! Is there anything we can do?" Elijah dried his hands on a towel. "I'm calling a meeting of all the ranchers tonight. We need to organize patrols." He glanced at the pot bubbling on the stove. "Might need to feed a few more mouths than planned." "I'll manage," Sarah assured him, already calculating how to stretch the stew. By sundown, the house was filled with ranchers from neighboring properties. Sarah moved efficiently among them, serving food and coffee, listening to their discussions. The men treated her with a respect that surprised her, different from the condescension she'd often encountered in Boston. As the meeting progressed, it became clear that the rustlers were part of a larger operation, one that had been plaguing the territory for months. The local sheriff was outnumbered and outgunned. "We need to handle this ourselves," declared Frank Johnson, the rancher who'd been hit. "Form a posse and track these vermin down, and risk more bloodshed," countered an older rancher. "We should wait for federal marshals. By then they'll have moved our beef across the border," Johnson argued. The debate continued until Elijah stood up. The room quieted immediately. "We'll organize in pairs," he said, his voice carrying authority. 2-man patrols covering the territory. No one rides alone. If you spot the rustlers, you don't engage, you ride for help. The plan was simple but sensible. The men nodded in agreement, even Johnson, though he looked disappointed at the lack of immediate action. After the ranchers left, Sarah found Elijah on the porch, staring out into the darkness. "They respect you," she observed, wrapping a shawl around her shoulders against the night chill. "They respect the double circle," Elijah corrected. "My father built this ranch from nothing. When he spoke, people listened. I'm just trying to live up to his legacy." "I think you're doing fine on your own merits," Sarah said softly. Elijah turned to look at her, his expression unreadable in the dim light. You've made quite a difference here, Miss Jenkins. In just a week, this place feels like a home again. I enjoy the work, she admitted. It's satisfying to see the results of one's efforts so immediately. Unlike sewing for demanding Boston ladies. There was a smile in his voice, precisely. Though I do miss creating beautiful things sometimes. Elijah was quiet for a moment. Tomorrow's Sunday, no work on the Lord's Day, perhaps you join me for a ride. There's a spot a few miles from here I'd like to show you. Sarah's heart quickened. I'd like that very much. Morning dawned clear and bright. Sarah dressed in her most practical outfit, a simple skirt and blouse that wouldn't hinder riding. She'd never been on a horse before, a fact she'd been too embarrassed to admit to Elijah. He was waiting by the stables, 2 horses saddled and ready. One was his usual mount, a powerful black stallion. The other was a gentle-looking mare with a dappled coat. "This is Daisy," Elijah said, patting the mare's neck. "She's steady as they come, perfect for a beginner." Sarah's cheeks flushed. "Is it that obvious I've never ridden?" Elijah's laugh was warm, without a hint of mockery. "Most Boston seamstresses haven't had much cause to ride, I'd imagine. But don't worry, Daisy will take good care of you." With patience, he taught her the basics: how to mount, how to hold the reins, how to signal the horse to walk, stop, and turn. By the time they set off, Sarah felt reasonably confident she wouldn't immediately fall off. They rode at a leisurely pace, Elijah pointing out features of the landscape and sharing stories of his childhood on the ranch. Sarah found herself relaxing, enjoying the rhythm of the horse beneath her and the company beside her. After about an hour, they crested a hill, and Sarah gasped at the view that spread before them. A crystal-clear lake nestled in a small valley, surrounded by trees just beginning to show their spring foliage. The water reflected the blue sky like a perfect mirror. "It's breathtaking," she said. "My father proposed to my mother here," Elijah said quietly. "He always said it was the most beautiful spot on the ranch." They dismounted and let the horses graze while they walked to the shore. Elijah spread a blanket on a grassy spot, and they sat side by side, looking out over the water. "I've been thinking about your situation," Elijah said after a comfortable silence. "Have you decided what you want to do long-term?" Sarah sighed. "I've been avoiding that question. The sensible thing would be to save my wages and eventually return east, but... Elijah prompted when she trailed off. "But I'm finding I like it here more than I expected," she admitted. "There's a freedom to the West that Boston never offered, and the people, they judge you on your actions, not your background or connections." Elijah nodded. "That's why my father came out here. He was the youngest son of a Virginia tobacco farmer, no inheritance, no prospects. Out here he could build something of his own." "You've done him proud," Sarah said sincerely. "The double circle is impressive." "It's a lot for one man to manage," Elijah said, his eyes on the horizon. "Sometimes I think about what my father would say if he could see me now, rattling around in that big house alone." Sarah's heart beat a little faster at the direction of the conversation. "What do you think he'd say?" Elijah turned to look at her, his gaze direct. "He'd tell me I'm a fool for not recognizing a blessing when it walks into my life, even if she does show up in torn shoes." Sarah's breath caught in her throat. "Mr. Atwood, Elijah," he corrected softly. "After all, we're not exactly employer and employee anymore, are we?" "What are we then?" Sarah asked, barely above a whisper. Instead of answering with words, Elijah reached for her hand. His touch was warm, calloused from years of hard work, yet gentle as he brought her fingers to his lips once more. This time the gesture lingered, his eyes holding hers with an intensity that made her heart race. "I know it's sudden," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "You came here looking for one life and found another entirely. I'm not asking for promises, just possibility." Sarah found herself nodding, unable to deny the connection that had been building between them from that first moment in Little Creek. "Possibility," she echoed. "I think I can manage that." The smile that broke across Elijah's face was like sunrise, transforming his features from handsome to breathtaking. Slowly, giving her every chance to pull away, he leaned forward until his lips met hers in a kiss so tender it brought tears to her eyes. When they finally broke apart, Sarah was surprised to find her cheeks wet. Elijah gently brushed away the tears with his thumb. "I didn't mean to make you cry," he said, concern in his voice. Sarah smiled through her tears. "It's not sadness, it's just... I came west expecting one future, then lost even that. And now, somehow, I've found something I wasn't even looking for." "Life has a way of taking unexpected turns," Elijah agreed, his arm settling around her shoulders as they gazed out at the lake, "sometimes for the better." They returned to the ranch in the late afternoon, riding side by side, their horses occasionally brushing against each other. Something fundamental had shifted between them, a door open to a future neither had anticipated. The next few weeks passed in a rhythm of work and discovery. Sarah continued to transform the ranch house, but now with the knowledge that she was building not just a home for Elijah, but potentially for herself as well. They took things slowly, getting to know each other through conversations that often stretched late into the night. Meanwhile, the threat of the cattle rustlers loomed. The patrols continued, with Elijah often riding out to take his turn. Each time he left, Sarah found herself watching the horizon until he returned, her heart constricting with worry. One evening in late May, Sarah was in the kitchen preparing dinner when she heard riders approaching at speed. She wiped her hands on her apron and stepped onto the porch just as Elijah and Frank Johnson galloped into the yard. "They've been spotted," Elijah called out, dismounting quickly. "A camp in the North Ridge, we're gathering men." Sarah's stomach knotted with fear. "How many rustlers?" "At least a dozen," Johnson answered grimly, "but we'll have more." Elijah came to her, taking her hands in his. "I have to go, we can't let them continue terrorizing the territory." Sarah nodded, trying to hide her fear. "I understand, but promise me you'll be careful." "I promise," he said, kissing her briefly before heading inside to gather his weapons. Within an hour, 20 men had assembled at the double circle. Sarah provided coffee and food while they finalized their plan. They would surround the rustlers' camp at dawn, hoping to catch them off guard and force a surrender without bloodshed. As the men prepared to ride out, Sarah pulled Elijah aside. From her pocket, she withdrew a small leather pouch. "I made this," she said, pressing it into his hand. "It's a charm my grandmother taught me to make, for protection." Elijah opened the pouch to find a small embroidered square with intricate stitching forming a pattern of interlocking circles, a symbol of eternity. "Sarah," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "Thank you." "Come back to me," she whispered, rising on tiptoe to kiss him. "Wild horses couldn't keep me away," he promised, tucking the charm into his shirt pocket close to his heart. The night that followed was the longest of Sarah's life. She tried to sleep but found herself pacing instead, jumping at every sound, praying for Elijah's safe return. By dawn, she'd given up any pretense of rest and was in the kitchen baking bread, needing to keep her hands busy. Mid-morning brought the sound she'd been waiting for, hoofbeats approaching the ranch. Sarah ran to the porch, her heart in her throat. The sight that greeted her nearly stopped her heart. Elijah was slumped in his saddle, supported by Johnson riding alongside him. His shirt was dark with blood. "Elijah," she cried, running toward them as they reached the yard. "He'll be all right," Johnson assured her as ranch hands helped ease Elijah from the saddle. "Bullet grazed his side, looks worse than it is." They carried Elijah into the house and laid him on his bed. Sarah immediately took charge, sending Tommy for clean water and bandages, ordering the men to cut away Elijah's shirt. The wound, as Johnson had said, was a deep graze along Elijah's ribs, painful and bloody, but not life-threatening. Sarah cleaned it carefully, applying a poultice of herbs she'd learned to use from her mother, then binding it with clean bandages. Throughout her ministrations, Elijah drifted in and out of consciousness, occasionally mumbling her name. Once he was settled, she sent the others away and sat beside him, holding his hand, waiting. It was evening when he finally opened his eyes fully, his gaze immediately finding hers. Sarah, he murmured, his voice weak but clear. I'm here, she said, squeezing his hand. Don't try to talk. You need to rest. Elijah shook his head slightly. Need to tell you, we got them, all of them. No more rustlers. Relief flooded through her. That's wonderful. But right now, all that matters is that you're going to be all right. His hand tightened on hers. Your charm worked. Bullet hit right where it would have gone through my heart, but it deflected. Hit the pouch first. Sarah's eyes filled with tears as she reached into his ruined shirt pocket and withdrew the leather pouch. Sure enough, there was a bullet hole through it, the embroidery torn. But the bullet had indeed been deflected, saving Elijah's life. I thought I'd lost you, she whispered, the tears spilling over. Elijah's free hand came up to touch her cheek. Never, I made you a promise, remember? His eyes grew serious. Sarah, I know it's only been a few weeks, but I've never been more certain of anything in my life. I love you. Sarah's heart swelled with joy. I love you too, she said, the words feeling right, true, inevitable. Marry me, Elijah said, his voice stronger now. Not because you need security or because I need a housekeeper, but because I want to build a life with you, face whatever comes together. Sarah leaned down and kissed him gently. Yes, she whispered against his lips. Yes, I'll marry you. 2 months later, Sarah stood on the porch of the double circle, watching the sunset paint the western sky in shades of gold and crimson. The ranch house behind her had been transformed curtains at the windows, fresh paint, flowers in vases, the unmistakable touches of a home well loved and cared for. She heard Elijah's footsteps before she felt his arms wrap around her waist from behind. He was fully recovered now, the wound healed to a thin scar that Sarah traced each night with gentle fingers. What are you thinking about, Mrs. Atwood? He murmured, his lips brushing her ear. Sarah leaned back against his solid strength. Just how different my life is from what I imagined when I stepped off that stagecoach in torn shoes. Elijah turned her in his arms to face him. Do you ever regret it? Coming west, I mean. Sarah shook her head, smiling up at him. Not for a moment. Those torn shoes led me exactly where I was meant to be. Elijah's answering smile was tender as he bent to kiss her, a kiss that still made her heart race and her knees weak. When they finally broke apart, breathless, he took her hand in his and raised it to his lips in an echo of that first day. From torn shoes to my heart, he said softly. Quite a journey. Sarah laughed, joy bubbling up inside her, and we're just getting started. As the last light faded from the sky, they stood together on the porch of the home they shared, their hands intertwined, the future stretching before them like the vast Wyoming landscape, wild and beautiful and full of promise.